Uh, Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about the People's Republic of China, namely China after the Communist Revolution of 1949, and we'll try to do so through propaganda posters, that is, through the self-narration carried out by the Communist Party itself, which has been leading the country for 75 years now. The series I'm starting today is the English version of the one I've just shot in Italian for my students and that I now wish to bring to a wider audience. For this presentation, I've used and will show you many propaganda posters, mostly from a book and a website. Let's start with the book. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit this museum, the Museum of Propaganda Art in Shanghai. It's a small museum hidden in the basement of an anonymous building not far from the city center and frequented only by Westerners like me, which exhibits originals and replicas of propaganda posters, mostly from the Mao years. I love the museum and its exhibition so much that I took this book home with me. It's the exhibition catalog with the hope of using it in a future history lesson. And today the time has finally come. While searching for materials for this lesson, I then found the wonderful website ChinesePosters.net, which offers a rich virtual archive of propaganda posters from the early 1900s to the present day. I will use posters from these two resources whenever possible. In the absence of posters, I will rely on photographs or a few graphics and so on in order not to interrupt my narration. In the description of the video, I will list these resources along with other bibliographical sources, some more academic, historical, or journalistic, and also some literature advice, some novels that have helped me tremendously, if not to understand, at least to imagine the lives of ordinary people during the years I'm about to describe, and I hope they can help too. So this is what we're going to go through today. We'll start from some of China's basic facts and national symbols, then we'll go to Tiananmen Square, where Chairman Mao Zedong is declaring the foundation of the People's Republic of China as captured by a very famous painting. We'll shortly jump back to the First Opium War and the beginning of the century of national humiliation to conclude with some signs of recovery from China. Let's start with the country's identity card then. China is this Asian giant you see depicted on the map, a giant because it alone covers more than 20% of the entire Asian continent. It is a giant because it is the fourth largest country in the world by geographical area, and above all, it is a demographic giant, with China accounting for nearly a fifth of the world's population. China is, in fact, home to nearly 1.5 billion people. Among the country's symbols, it's absolutely its national flag, which is red in clear homage to the Communist Revolution and features five yellow stars at the top left. The largest symbolizes the Communist Party, under whose leadership the other four stars revolve, representing the four revolutionary social classes workers, peasants, petty bourgeois, and revolutionary bourgeois. Another possible interpretation of the flag is the ethnic one, with the five stars then representing the largest one, the Han ethnic group, which is the country's majority ethnic group, comprising approximately 92% of the population, or roughly 1.3 billion of China's over 1.4 billion residents. And the other four stars representing four of the most widespread ethnic minorities Manchurians, Mongols, Hui, and Tibetans. China is indeed a multi ethnic country, home not only to the Han majority but also to 55 other minorities, which together share the country's nearly 100 million non Han people. Therefore, we speak of ethnic minorities in a purely relative sense, because the absolute numbers are still substantial. Among the country's symbols is obviously the dragon, which we see here dancing during the Spring Festival, otherwise known as the Chinese New Year, the celebration of the new year according to the lunar calendar. This is a traditional festival that actually unites China with other countries in Southeast Asia. Another symbol is undoubtedly the Great Wall, which connects us to the country's history, the wall being an impressive structure that extends for thousands of kilometers and whose construction began around 200 BC under the leadership of the first Chinese emperor Qin Shi Huangdi, and then continued for centuries. Vast portions of the wall are still visible today, accessible to and highly visited by visitors. Qin Shi Huangdi is also the same emperor who commissioned the construction of the Terracotta Army, another breathtaking monument featuring approximately 10,000 statues of warriors and knights, all unique and different from each other, which we can still admire today in Xi'an. Indeed, we can admire again in Xi'an, as the archaeological site was discovered by chance by a farmer in his field only in 1974, after being buried for who knows how many centuries. China, however, is not only antiquity but also modernity. It is, in fact, today known as the factory of the world. Here we see a photograph of Foxconn, the company that produces the smartphones we often find in our pockets, and the logo of Huawei, one of the companies that produce them. But China is also a hub of global finance and capitalism. Here we see the Shanghai Bund with its skyscraper and the iconic Oriental Pearl Tower, illuminated in red, as well as the logo of ICBC, which is a Chinese bank that is now the largest in the world. But let's get back to the People's Republic of China. It's October the 1st, 1949, when President Mao Zedong, depicted here in this artistic representation of the inauguration and founding ceremony of the Republic, utters the phrase I've included in the title, 中国人民站起来了, meaning the Chinese people have risen, and we'll see in a moment in what sense. Mao utters this phrase at the end of his speech from a stage in front of the Forbidden City, the city within the city of Beijing. This is a highly symbolic position because the Forbidden City is the enormous walled residential complex where the emperors had lived for centuries, up until the last one, Puyi, whom you can discover in Bertolucci's 1987 film, The Last Emperor. In front of Chairman Mao is the immense Tiananmen Square, crowded with the masses liberated by the recently concluded revolution. Behind Mao, we find the party leaders and the heroes of the revolution represented in the front row in a strict hierarchical order. The first visible on the left is Zhou Enlai, who would be Minister of Foreign Affairs until 1954, then Prime Minister until his death in 1976. Immediately after him is General Zhu De, who had met Zhou in Beijing and had been with Mao since 1928. Next to Zhu is Liu Shaoqi, who would become deputy secretary of the party and then president from 1959 to 68. In the center of the row is the only woman in the group. It's Missing Sun Qinling, who is, however, a particularly important woman. She is, in fact, Sun Yat-sen's third wife. Who was Sun Yat-sen? Mr. Sun Yat-sen, also known as Sun Zhongshan in Mandarin Chinese pronunciation, was the first president of the First Chinese Republic, not the People's Republic that is the communist one, founded in 1949 and represented here, but the Republic of China, the one founded in 1912 on the ashes of the Qing Empire, when the Yang Puyi we mentioned earlier was deposed. Sun Qinling's presence thus serves to create a common thread and to provide continuity in Chinese history from the First Republic to this new People's Republic. Sun Yat-sen is still celebrated and honored today as one of the founding fathers of the nation, even though he was never a communist, having lived before this period and died in 1925. The mausoleum built for him can still be visited today in Nanjing, the capital of the time. Immediately after Song Qinling, we find General Li Jishen, then Zhang Lan, who was the leader of the China Democratic League, and finally the party cadre Gao Gang. It's a lot of difficult names to remember, I know, but they are not all so important to remember, don't worry. The reason I showed you this picture is that it isn't the only version of this painting. I will show you another one. I don't know if you notice the differences, except the colors that are a bit faded in the second one. Two people are missing. Can you see it? Here they are. Gone is Liu Shaoqi, who, after serving as president until 1968, was expelled on charges of being a capitalist and died in prison the following year. And also gone is the last in line, the cadre Gao Gang, who was expelled from the government after his failed attempt to take over in 1954 and who later committed suicide. This first poster, therefore, already gives us a glimpse of the function of propaganda in the country, a propaganda capable of writing and rewriting its own history, in this case, redrawing this picture several times. In fact, I showed you only two versions, but there are way more. Picture redrawn multiple times to modify the collective memory of this opening ceremony as needed, in a style very reminiscent of Winston Smith's work in George Orwell's 1984. Now, however, let's take a quick, even if very long, leap backwards and see from what situation, in Chairman Mao's words, the Chinese people had risen. We go back to 1839, the beginning of what is still called today in Chinese history books and in history books circulating in China, the century of national humiliation. What is the century of national humiliation exactly? It is the period that opens in 1839 with a similar scene to this one. It is the storming of Canton, in which Western powers, led by the United Kingdom, attacked China in Canton and defeated it in a war that will later be called the First Opium War. First, because, spoiler alert, there will be a second one. The Opium Wars pitted Western powers, led by the United Kingdom, against the Chinese Empire, which would emerge defeated in both. The First Opium War lasted from 1839 to 1842. A second would follow from 1856 to 1860. Why did the Opium War break out? Well, for a very simple reason. China was accustomed to playing the role of economic and military giant in its own geographical area, where it had been a superpower for centuries, and to treating its partners like dwarfs, if you'll pardon the simplification I'm using. The Chinese Empire had opened to the Western traders only the port of Canton or Guangzhou, which is still a very important city in southern China. It's situated just in front of Hong Kong and Shenzhen. And Western traders went there to buy Chinese goods, the top of which was certainly tea, but also, of course, porcelain and silk. Here you can see a painting of the so-called factories in Canton. That is the warehouses used by the Westerners for their trade. There was a problem, however. China, which remember still considered itself culturally superior to the other nations, wasn't interested in the goods the British and the West wanted to export. It wasn't interested in the scientific and technological discoveries developed on such an insignificant remote island, let alone the fashionable trinkets that England and other Western powers wanted to sell it. Merchants thus faced a serious economic and commercial problems. The ships sailing from China to England loaded with tea, silks, and porcelain had to then return from England to China unloaded because the Chinese were not interested in British products. And this empty voyage, a journey that at the time took months, represented an enormous cost that needed to be recouped. Added to this logistical problem was an obvious financial one. How to pay for the enormous quantity of Chinese goods, given that the Chinese were not interested in any counterpart. How to balance the trade balance. The coffers of Western powers could not continue to empty of silver to pay. To solve both problems, the logistical and the financial one, the Western powers came up with the idea of illegally smuggling opium into the country. Opium was a drug and still is the basis of many drugs that was clearly illegal in China but was produced in abundance in India, which at the time was a rich possession of the British Crown and which a few years later would become the jewel of the British Crown. This trade was obviously illegal and opposed by the Chinese authorities because, like all drugs, it caused suffering, degradation, and death, especially among the lower classes of the population. So, what happens next? The Chinese government says, we don't want it, stop it now. And at a certain point, sends a prefect, Lin Zexu, to Canton to monitor and stop this illegal opium trade. Lin Zexu is a stalwart official, incorruptible, and convinced of the importance of his duty. One day he stops a ship loaded with crates and crates of this illegal commodity at the port. He decides to confiscate them and to ensure the British couldn't bribe anyone to get them back. As Chinese officials weren't, of course, all like him, he has them immediately thrown overboard, thus causing a huge loss to the company that transported them there, albeit illegally. The Westerners get angry, appeal to the sacred laws of the market, much as we would appeal to human rights and democracy today, and declare war. They unitedly attack Canton, everyone against China, and manage to defeat it almost immediately. This was a pivotal moment and a humiliating one for Chinese history because China had been and considered itself until then, let's say, the beacon of civilization, at least for that part of the world, and now found itself pitted against the other side of the world for the first time, facing modern and much better equipped armies. It thus found itself in an unexpected bind, or worse, it found itself succumbing. But back to the propaganda, excuse the digression. The image you see is not a Communist Party propaganda poster, of course, which obviously didn't exist at the time, but a French satirical cartoon of the time depicting China as a cake being divided up by Western powers. In fact, not just Western powers, because the ones dividing up the cake are depicted from left to right in caricatured fashion: United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, France, and the last one, Japan. Even Japan, being fleshed out even by the Japanese, who until the day before were vassals and heirs in some way of Chinese culture, must have been the hardest humiliation of them all to stomach. Behind the table, a Chinese man depicted with semi diabolical features, presumably the emperor, tries to stop them. A small bibliographical recommendation here. I'll try to give you some during the presentation, as I said. It is the second in a trilogy of novels by Amitav Ghosh, an Indian writer. River of Smoke. It revolves precisely around this war. Ghosh's homeland, India, as we've said, was the other end of the trade triangle, the one that produced opium, and its trade obviously had a catastrophic impact on both countries. The entire trilogy, in fact, but especially this second book, recounts the years of the Opium War, its outbreak, and its development. Now, don't worry, I want to recount here in detail all the events of the century of national humiliation, but this first encounter clash between China and the West seemed particularly important to me. In addition to the two opium wars, which forced China to open its ports and cities to Western powers, suffice it to mention the defeat in the Sino-Japanese War of 1895, which confirmed that the archipelago, though smaller, as it is depicted in the picture on the left, was no longer a vassal of the mainland and could now claim its role as Asia's hegemonic power. Following this war, the island of Taiwan passes to Japan and will return to this, of course. Then the Boxer Rebellion between 1899 and 1901, in which a spontaneous popular mass rebelled against the foreigners now residing in China. This popular movement was somehow permitted and fueled by Empress Cixi, but the consequences were once again disastrous, with China once again defeated and once again forced to cede fragments of sovereignty to the Western powers, whose armies we see here even parading inside the Forbidden City. Then the May 4th movement of 1999, in which university students protested against the government. The empire had been dissolved in 1911, remember, for being too soft on accepting the Treaty of Versailles that ended the First World War. The war had seen China on the side of the Triple Entente, with France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, and therefore among the winners. But when the peace treaty was signed, the German occupied province of Shandong, rather than being returned to China, was assigned instead to Japan. And finally, the icing on the cake, the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the northeastern area of China, and the creation of the puppet state of Manchukuo within Chinese territory in 1931. To better understand the century of national humiliation, the end of the Qing dynasty, and the spirit of the May 4th movement, it's essential to reread the works of Lu Xun, perhaps the greatest Chinese writer of the era. In his most famous short story, The True Story of A.Q., which I recommend here, Lu Xun profoundly criticizes Qing-era Chinese society and its complacency, submissiveness, and illusion of moral superiority. The story is a powerful tool for reflection on the need for China's social and spiritual renewal. In the beautiful introduction to the short story collection Outcries, Lu Xun talks to a friend and describes his craft as a writer using these words. Imagine an iron house, having not a single window and virtually indestructible, with all its inmates sound asleep and about to die of suffocation. Dying in their sleep, they won't feel the pain of death. Now, if you raise a shout to wake a few of the lighter sleepers, making these unfortunate few suffer the agony of irrevocable death, do you really think you are doing them a good turn? To which the friend replies, but if a few wake up, you can't say there is no hope of destroying the iron house. I'll go back a step further to emphasize the importance that, in retrospect, has been attributed to the May 4th movement, considered a crucial event in China's modern history, both for the surge of national pride it evinced and because it embodied a critique of the Confucian tradition. The movement is also considered crucial in creating a political climate favorable to the founding of the Chinese Communist Party, which occurred 2 years later in July 1921. in Shanghai, in the now hip and commercial Xintiandi neighborhood, where today one can take a pilgrimage through the party's history and then sit at one of the tables in the trendy cafes in the shopping center that now bears the neighborhood's name. The building you see in the poster, which hosted the first National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party in July 1921, is now home to the museum that showcases the story I began to tell you today, from humiliation to rebirth, to redemption. But it's a much longer story that can fit into a single video, so I'll stop here for now. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to this channel so you'll be first to know when the new one is out. And if you loved it, buy me a coffee through the link down here. In the next video, we'll retrace the years immediately following the founding of the People's Republic, and we'll see what challenges China faced and how the party attempted to address them. Until then, 再见.